Maria was exhausted. The car accident had left her not only physically weakened but also emotionally drained. She had been hospitalized for a week, and each passing day, the physical pain mingled with the anguish of not having Carlos, her husband, by her side as she had hoped. He was always absent, with excuses of work and unavoidable commitments. Maria tried to convince herself that he was doing the best he could, but a shadow of doubt began to settle in her mind. It was a cold and rainy morning. The sound of raindrops hitting the hospital windows echoed through the hallways. Maria was lying in her bed, watching the movement of nurses and doctors. The hospital routine was both comforting and oppressive. She missed her home, her comfort, and above all, Carlos. Throughout the week, she had grown fond of some of the nurses, especially Nurse Clara, a middle-aged woman with a warm smile and a gentle touch. Clara often spent a few extra minutes with Maria, chatting about trivialities and trying to lift her spirits. "Carlos hasn't come today?" Clara asked while adjusting Maria's fur. "No, he said he was stuck in an important meeting," Maria replied, trying to hide her frustration. Clara gave a slight smile, but Maria could see the compassion in her eyes. "He must be very worried about you. It's hard for men to deal with these situations sometimes." Maria just nodded, not wanting to prolong the subject. When Clara left the room, Maria decided she needed to stretch her legs. Carefully, she got out of bed and began to walk slowly down the corridor, using her walker for support. The hallways were relatively empty at that moment. As she walked, Maria felt the tension in her muscles but also a certain relief from moving. She passed by a few semi-open doors, quickly peeking into the lives of other patients, each with their own stories and challenges. It was then that she saw her. At the end of the corridor, a woman was talking to a doctor. Something about that woman seemed familiar, but Maria couldn't pinpoint what it was. The woman had long brown hair, and her gestures were graceful and confident. When she turned to look in another direction, Maria caught a glimpse of her face. Her heart almost stopped. It was Anna, a former colleague of Carlos. Maria vaguely remembered her from the company's year-end parties and a few social events. Anna had always been charming and friendly, but Maria had never thought much of her. Now, seeing her in the hospital, something felt out of place. Maria tried to push away the disturbing thoughts that began to surface in her mind. After all, Anna could be at the hospital for any reason. Maybe she was visiting a relative or friend. However, a feeling of unease wouldn't leave her in peace. Maria continued walking down the corridor, trying not to think about Anna anymore. When she returned to her room, she found a message from Carlos on her cell phone, saying he would arrive later that night. She sighed, feeling lonelier than ever. Night fell, and the hospital grew quieter. Maria was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when she heard footsteps in the corridor. The door opened and Carlos entered. He looked tired, but his smile was warm. "Hi, love," he said, approaching the bed to kiss her forehead. "Sorry for the delay. How are you feeling?" "I'm better," Maria replied, trying to smile. "But I missed you." Carlos held her hand. "I missed you too. But soon you'll be home, and everything will be back to normal." Maria wanted to believe his words, but something in his expression made her hesitate. There was a distance in Carlos's eyes, something she couldn't identify. They talked for a few more minutes, with Carlos recounting his day at work and Maria trying to appear interested. After a while, Carlos said goodbye, mentioning that he needed to return to the office to finish some reports. Maria watched as he left, feeling a growing emptiness in her chest. Something wasn't right, but she couldn't put her finger on what it was. The next morning, Maria woke up early and decided to take another walk. This time, she was determined to find out more about Anna's presence in the hospital. Maybe she was being paranoid, but she needed answers to calm her restless mind. As she walked through the corridors, Maria kept her eyes peeled for any sign of Anna. When she was about to give up, she heard voices coming from a nearby room. Curious, she slowly approached and peeked through the slightly open door. Inside, she saw Anna sitting next to a bed, holding the hand of an older man who seemed to be sleeping. Maria felt a wave of relief. It looked like Anna was really there to visit someone, maybe a sick relative. She was about to walk away when she heard something that made her stop. "I promise I'll find a way to spend more time with you," Anna whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "Carlos is doing his best, but it's hard for him to leave home without raising suspicions." Maria's heart raced. She felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Anna's words echoed in her mind, each one a stab in her heart. Carlos was meeting with Anna, and they were trying to keep everything a secret. Maria quietly stepped back, her legs trembling. She returned to her room and collapsed on the bed, trying to process what she had just heard. Carlos's betrayal was an unbearable pain, but now, knowing he was lying to her while she was hospitalized was too much to bear. She needed answers. And more importantly, she needed to confront Carlos and Anna. The pain of betrayal was turning into a fierce determination. She wouldn't be a passive victim. It was time to face the truth, no matter how painful it was. Maria could hardly sleep that night. The physical pain mingled with the emotional pain, creating a storm of feelings in her heart. With each tick of the hospital clock, her mind replayed the words she had heard from Anna. How could Carlos betray her in such a cruel way, especially while she was vulnerable and hospitalized? These questions echoed in her mind, making it impossible to find any peace. At dawn, Maria felt exhausted but determined. She needed more proof before confronting Carlos and Anna. She wanted to know exactly what was happening before making any decisions. As she prepared for the day, she decided she would follow Carlos again, but this time with more caution. Carlos arrived at the hospital late in the morning. He seemed more relaxed than in previous days, and his smile seemed genuine. Maria wondered how he could maintain this facade while betraying her so blatantly. They talked for a few minutes, and Carlos mentioned that he needed to go out to take care of some work matters. "I'll be back later, I promise," he said, leaning in to kiss her forehead. Maria forced a smile and nodded. "It's okay. I'll be waiting." As soon as Carlos left, Maria waited a few minutes before discreetly following him. She knew he wouldn't suspect anything, considering her health condition. Using her walker, she followed him through the hospital corridors, keeping a safe distance. Carlos seemed to be in a hurry, walking quickly toward the elevator. Maria waited for him to enter the elevator before calling the next one. Her fingers trembled as she pressed the button, and her heart pounded erratically. When the elevator reached the ground floor, she exited and looked around, searching for Carlos. She saw him leaving through the front door and hurried to follow him. Outside, the air was fresh and invigorating. Maria felt a surge of energy as she walked behind Carlos, keeping a sufficient distance to avoid being noticed. He walked a few blocks before arriving at a small cafe. Maria watched him enter and sit at a table near the window. She hid behind a nearby tree, watching intently. After a few minutes, Anna entered the cafe and headed straight to Carlos's table. They exchanged a quick hug before sitting down and starting to chat animatedly. Maria felt a wave of nausea seeing the intimacy between them. Carlos held Anna's hand across the table, and they laughed together. The scene looked like something out of a romance, but for Maria, it was a nightmare. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but the expressions on their faces made it clear there was much more between them than simple friendship. After a few minutes, Carlos and Anna got up and left the cafe, walking side by side. Maria followed them at a distance, her steps slow and careful. They arrived at a small nearby park and sat on an isolated bench. Carlos wrapped his arm around Anna's shoulders, and she nestled into him as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Maria felt the tears start to stream down her face. Every affectionate gesture between Carlos and Anna was a stab to her heart. She had never imagined that her husband, the man with whom she had shared her life and dreams, could betray her in such a cruel way. The feeling of betrayal was overwhelming, but she knew she had to keep going. She needed more proof to confront them. Carlos and Anna talked for a few more minutes before getting up and starting to walk back. Maria hurried back to the hospital ahead of them, not wanting Carlos to see her out of her room. When she returned, she was exhausted and emotionally destroyed, but also determined. That night, Carlos returned to the hospital as promised. He seemed unconcerned, as if nothing had happened. Maria watched his every move, every word, looking for signs of guilt or remorse but found none. He was a skillful actor, and that infuriated her even more. "How was your day?" Carlos asked, sitting beside Maria's bed. "It was good," she replied, trying to hide her anger. "And yours?" "Busy as always," he said with a smile. "But I managed to find time to come see you. That's what matters." Maria bit her lip to keep from saying anything. She wanted to scream, to confront him right then and there, but she knew she needed to wait. She needed a better moment to expose the truth. In the following days, Maria continued to observe Carlos and Ana. Each of their meetings confirmed the betrayal, proving that her marriage was falling apart. The pain and anger built up inside her until finally she could no longer bear it. It was a cloudy afternoon when Maria decided it was time to confront Carlos and Ana. She waited until Carlos arrived at the hospital, and instead of waiting in her room, she followed him again. This time he went straight to Anna's room. Maria hid behind a column in the corridor, watching as he entered. She waited a few minutes before approaching the slightly open door. Inside she could hear their voices, laughing and talking. The sound was like acid in her ears. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves, then pushed the door open, entering the room without warning. Carlos and Ana turned, surprised, as she walked in. The ensuing silence was deafening. Maria looked at them, her hands trembling with anger. "Maria, what are you doing here?" Carlos asked, standing up quickly. "I should ask you the same thing," Maria replied, her voice cold and controlled. "What are you doing here, Carlos? And why are you with Ana?" Carlos opened his mouth to respond but couldn't find the words. Ana, on the other hand, seemed to recover her composure quickly. "Maria, you don't understand," Ana said, taking a step forward. "Carlos and we..." "Don't you dare finish that sentence," Maria interrupted, her voice filled with venom. "I saw you together. I heard you talking about him. You're my husband's lover, and you're trying to justify it." Carlos tried to approach Maria, but she raised her hand to stop him. "Don't come near me," she said, her eyes blazing with anger. "I trusted you, Carlos. I trusted you more than anyone else, and you betrayed me." Carlos lowered his head, unable to meet her eyes. Ana looked uncomfortable but not ashamed. Maria felt a wave of contempt for both of them. "I thought our marriage meant something to you," Maria continued, her voice shaking. "But I was wrong, and now I want you to leave. Leave my room and my life." Carlos tried to argue, but Maria didn't want to hear it. She turned and left the room, feeling a mixture of relief and pain. Relief for finally confronting the truth, and pain for realizing her marriage was over. As she walked back to her room, Maria felt a new sense of determination. She had faced the betrayal head-on, and now she was ready to move forward. No matter how painful it was, she knew it was the only way to go. Maria was in her room, her breath still heavy and her heart racing after the confrontation with Carlos and Ana. She could hardly believe what she had just done. The tears finally came, and she cried silently, letting the pain and anger consume her. She felt betrayed, humiliated, and alone. The woman she thought was her friend, and the man she loved, had betrayed her in the worst possible way. Nurse Clara entered the room, bringing Maria's medication, but seeing her state, she set the tray aside and approached, concerned. "Maria, what happened? Are you all right?" Clara asked, holding Maria's hand gently. Maria tried to respond, but the words caught in her throat. She shook her head, unable to articulate her feelings. Clara sat beside her on the bed, enveloping her in a comforting embrace. "You can tell me when you're ready," Clara said softly. "I'm here to help." With Clara's support, Maria managed to calm down enough to explain what had happened. She told her about discovering the betrayal, the confrontation in Anna's room, and the devastation she felt. Clara listened attentively, offering words of comfort and encouragement. You're very brave, Maria, Clara said. Confronting such a betrayal takes a lot of strength. And now, you need to focus on your recovery. Don't let this destroy you. Maria nodded, recognizing the truth in Clara's words. She needed to be strong not just for herself, but to face the uncertain future ahead of her. As Clara left the room to get something for Maria to eat, Maria lay down, feeling exhausted. She closed her eyes and tried to rest, but her mind was racing. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the image of Carlos and Ana together, laughing and sharing moments that should have been hers. Time seemed to drag on, and Maria didn't know how much time had passed when she heard a soft knock on the door. She sat up in bed and saw Carlos standing in the doorway, with a look of regret on his face. "Maria, can we talk?" he asked, his voice low and hesitant. She hesitated for a moment but finally nodded. Carlos entered the room and closed the door behind him. He seemed nervous, running his hand through his hair repeatedly. "I know you're angry," he began. "And you have every right to be. I was wrong and there's no excuse for what I did. But please let me explain." Maria crossed her arms and looked at him steadily, waiting for him to continue. Carlos took a deep breath and began to speak. "Ana and I started getting closer a few months ago," he said, his voice full of regret. "I was feeling stressed with work and life in general, and she was there to listen to me. It wasn't my intention for things to go this far, but it happened, and I'm very sorry for it." Maria felt a wave of anger at his words. "You're sorry. That's all you have to say. You destroyed our life together, Carlos. You betrayed me in the worst way possible." "I know," Carlos said, lowering his head. "And I don't expect you to forgive me. But I wanted you to know that I still love you, and I never wanted to hurt you." Maria laughed bitterly. "You still love me? Is that a joke? If you really loved me, you would never have cheated on me with Ana." Carlos remained silent, unable to respond. He knew there was nothing he could say to justify his actions. "Get out of here, Carlos," Maria finally said, her voice firm. "I need time to think, and you are no longer part of my life." Carlos hesitated for a moment but finally nodded and stood up. He looked at Maria one last time before leaving the room, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The following days were difficult for Maria. She focused on her physical recovery, but the emotional pain was still intense. Clara continued to visit her, offering support and encouragement. Over time, Maria began to feel a bit stronger, determined to move forward despite Carlos' betrayal. One day, while sitting in bed reading a book, Ana entered the room. Maria was surprised to see her, but her expression quickly turned to anger. "What are you doing here?" Maria asked, her voice full of disdain. Ana looked nervous but determined. "I came to apologize," she said, approaching the bed. "I know what I did was wrong and I'm very sorry for it." Maria looked at her with contempt. "You're sorry? You destroyed my marriage, Ana. How can you even think that an apology will fix that?" "I know it won't," Ana said, tears in her eyes. "But I needed to tell you that I never meant to hurt you. Carlos and we made a terrible mistake and I'm sorry for it." Maria was silent for a moment, trying to control her anger. "I don't want to hear your apologies, Ana. You made your choice, and now you have to live with the consequences." Ana nodded, tears running down her face. "I understand, and I'll leave you alone. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry." She turned and left the room, leaving Maria alone once again. Maria felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief for finally telling Ana how she felt, and sadness for realizing that her marriage was truly over. As the weeks passed, Maria continued to focus on her recovery. She began planning her future, thinking about how to rebuild her life without Carlos. She knew it would be a difficult path, but she was determined to move forward. One day, while sitting in the hospital garden, reflecting on everything that had happened, Clara approached and sat beside her. "How are you feeling today?" Clara asked, smiling gently. "Better," Maria replied, looking at the sky. It still hurts, but I'm starting to see a future without Carlos. Clara nodded. You're a strong woman, Maria. And I know you'll get through this. Maria smiled, feeling a new wave of determination. She knew that, with time, the pain of betrayal would lessen, and she would be able to find happiness again. For now, she was focused on her recovery and building a new beginning for herself. Time passed slowly for Maria as she navigated through the pain of betrayal and the healing process. Each day brought new challenges but also new discoveries about herself and her resilience. She started therapy, finding solace and strength in the weekly sessions. With professional help, she began to realize that despite the devastating betrayal, she still had much to offer the world and herself. Maria decided she needed a radical change to move forward. She started looking for a new place to live, something far from the memories of her marriage with Carlos. After weeks of searching, she found a cozy apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It was small, but it had a beautiful view and, more importantly, represented a new beginning. Meanwhile, Carlos desperately tried to win Maria back. He sent flowers, letters, and messages daily, asking for forgiveness and a chance for redemption. Maria read each of the letters but didn't respond to any of them. She felt she needed time and space to rediscover herself before considering any possibility of reconciliation. One day, while walking through the park near the hospital, Maria found Anna sitting on a bench, looking thoughtful. Anna saw her and hesitated but finally gestured for Maria to join her. Reluctantly, Maria accepted the invitation, feeling that maybe this meeting could bring some closure. Maria, I know you don't want to see me, Anna began, her voice trembling. But I feel like I need to say one more time how sorry I am for everything that happened. Maria looked at Anna, noticing the shadows under her eyes and the guilt on her face. Anna, nothing you say can change what happened, she replied calmly. But I'm willing to listen. Maybe it will help both of us move on. Anna took a deep breath and began to speak, explaining how her relationship with Carlos had started and how she felt now. She confessed that she was remorseful and had ended the relationship with Carlos right after the confrontation at the hospital. Maria listened in silence, feeling a strange sense of relief at hearing Anna's words. I know I ruined everything, Anna said, tears in her eyes. And I know I can never make it right. But I wanted you to know that I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be a better person. Maria nodded, feeling a wave of compassion for Anna. We all make mistakes, Anna. And although I can never forget what happened, maybe someday I can forgive. They parted with a silent handshake, both feeling a bit lighter in their hearts. Maria knew the path to forgiveness would be long, but she felt she had taken the first step. The following weekend, Maria was in her new apartment, unpacking the last boxes, when she heard a knock on the door. Upon opening it, she found Carlos, with an expression of despair and regret. He was holding a small wooden box in his hands. Maria, please let me speak, Carlos said, his voice full of emotion. I brought something for you. Maria hesitated but finally stepped aside, allowing Carlos to enter. He placed the box on the table and opened it, revealing a collection of photos, old letters, and small objects representing important moments in their relationship. I know I ruined everything, Carlos began, his voice breaking. But these are our moments, our memories. I wanted you to know that despite everything, each of these moments was real for me. I truly loved you, and I still do. Maria felt a mix of emotions as she looked at the items in the box. Memories of happy times and shared moments flooded her mind. She took a deep breath, trying to control the avalanche of feelings. Carlos, she finally said, her voice firm. I appreciate what you're trying to do. But you need to understand that what you did can't be erased with apologies or memories. The betrayal I suffered isn't something I can simply forget. Carlos nodded, his eyes full of tears. I know, Maria. And I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry and that I will always love you. Maria looked at him for a long moment, feeling the pain and love mixed in her heart. Carlos, I need time. I need space to heal and to discover who I am without you. Maybe one day we can find a way to move forward, But right now, I need to focus on myself. Carlos slowly nodded. I understand. And I hope that one day you can find happiness, even if it's not with me. He stood up and, with one last sad look, left the apartment. Maria closed the door behind him and sat down, looking at the box of memories. She knew that the path to healing would be long and difficult, but she felt a new determination in her heart. She was ready to face the future, regardless of the challenges that lay ahead. In the weeks that followed, Maria began to involve herself more in activities that made her happy. She started painting again, something she had abandoned years ago, and found joy in creating new works of art. She also began volunteering at a local charity, helping those who were in even more difficult situations than her own. One day, while at the charity, Maria met Lucas, a kind young man passionate about his work. They started talking and quickly developed a friendship. Lucas had a positive energy that was contagious, and Maria felt rejuvenated every time she was around him. Over time, the friendship between Maria and Lucas blossomed into something more. He supported her on her healing journey, offering a friendly shoulder and a listening ear. Maria discovered that it was possible to love again, in a healthier and more balanced way. A year after the devastating discovery of Carlos' betrayal, Maria found herself in a completely different place. She had found strength within herself and rebuilt her life. Although the scars of betrayal were still there, they had transformed into marks of resilience. One sunny afternoon, while walking in the park with Lucas, Maria stopped to look at the blue sky and felt a wave of gratitude. She knew that despite all the difficulties, she had found a new form of happiness. And finally, she was ready to move forward with her new love by her side, leaving the past behind and embracing the future with hope.